It's not cheap. It's not cheap, but I think that it's a real good book to have something that will tell you important stuff really about every period in Roman history. By this guy Brendan Nagel. I think it's published originally in 2010, so fairly recent as classical studies go. Then there's another book that I found while I was looking this up, also by Nagel, and I haven't seen this book, but it's looks like just a condensation of his other book for half the money, and says a beautifully illustrated textbook, full color maps. I haven't seen it, but it sounds really nice. The big textbook is all grayscale. There's no color in it, so that would be nice. I also found a series of websites under the name of the Key to Umbria, which are really good stuff. What they are is a close analysis. This was done kind of in a celebration of Umbria, a modern celebration of Umbria, and this woman, I think her name is Evans. Linda Evans, perhaps. This is a project of love for her, but it's really good scholarship. And what she does is she basically goes through Livy and then brings in other ancient historians and modern historians to basically comment on all of these things, and it's very granular, and I used it a lot, and I highly recommend this. Really good stuff. So she's got this one on the period up through 343, and then this one on the first Samnite War, and then this one on the Second Latin War, which happens afterwards. So I think that, well, anyway, so the links are there and you can explore them if you like. And I found them to be really worthwhile. So,
Paul, one question. Are
yeah.
Samnites italics?
Pardon me?
Are Samnites italics?
Yes. Samnites. Yes, yeah. They're italics indeed.
Okay.
They're Oscan-speaking people who lived in the center spine of Italy, you know, in the Apennine valleys. We're going to talk extensively about them today.
Okay.
Okay. So that said, let's begin the presentation itself. And I'm going to share in a different way now. So, does everybody see this full screen?
Yes.
Okay, just
yeah.
And it's full screen, right? No other stuff in it. Okay, so just to let people know, I kind of up my technology capability here, and I've found a way to do a layout, and I've got the chat open so I can see it while I'm doing the presentation. So if people have anything they want to contribute on the chat, or just in the way that I'm accustomed to doing things, I welcome anybody to make a comment when they have something that they see, question they want to ask, comment they want to make. Just jump in, and I'm sure everybody knows, you know, how to do this in a respectful way, and so that's my preference for doing this. So this is the second part of presentation that I did. First part was about a month ago, and this is the second part of the Roman expansion in Italy. Let's No, these controls are not working exactly the way I want. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so I want to start with a quick review. When the Roman Republic was established in the last decade of the 6th century BCE, it was a very small place. It was surrounded by aggressive state and tribal groups. For most of the 5th century until 420 or so, Rome suffered yearly incursions by the hill tribesmen, the Oscan-speaking Aequi and the Volsci. Cities were taken by the invaders and reconquered by the Romans multiple times. And Rome established alliances with the Latin cities and the, here, where's my, laser pointer. Okay, so here's the core of Rome. The Latin cities are like in a ring around Rome, and then to the north were the Sabini, to the northeast the Equi, and then the Volsci, who were really in the hill area here, and then will come down and overwhelm the plains. So Rome established alliances with the Latin cities and with the Hernici in order to resist these incursions, and without these alliances, most likely Rome would have not survived, and we would not be talking about Rome today. In fact, we wouldn't be here in the way that we are. What Rome did manage to do during this period was to establish what were essentially military colonies. Rome's allies participated in this effort, but at least 50% of every colony consisted of Roman citizens. The colonies were situated in strategic locations on the perimeter of Roman and Allied territory, so they were first to be attacked during these annual raids. At one point, the Volsci overran the Alban Hills, which is right here. You can see Alba Longa, and managed to penetrate all the way to the seacoast. So here, the town of Antium, the city of Antium, became a Volscian place. The city of Praevenum became a Volscian place. And even when Rome prevailed in battles and established colonies and managed to push these people back, entire regions and cities continued to be occupied by Rome's enemies. So you got to think of this area. It's not uniformly Roman. It's not uniformly Volsci. It's mixed with the balance of power swinging back and forth. Starting around 415 BC, Roman policy entered a new, more aggressive phase. Rome tried to push the Volsci out of Latium. They retook the towns taken by the Volsci in the Latin highlands and along the coast. They won a major victory at Antium and went on to take Circeii, which is down here. But we'll see that wasn't 100%. And as I say, the pendulum continued to swing back and forth. Then in 405 BC, Rome instituted a series of reforms designed to put their military on a more secure foundation. So basically what we're saying here is the Romans got serious about funding the military. They were starting to become a seriously organized place, and even though the military was not professional, these were citizen soldiers, at the same time, the military was being professionalized, if you will. Soldiers on campaign would now be paid. A property tax was instituted to provide funds, and Rome initiated the practice of extracting indemnities from conquered foes. The most important event in this period was the Roman conquest of the Etruscan city of Veii, right here. This was a war between two sophisticated city-states, quite different from the annual raids by the hill people. The war started sometime in the late 400s and ended in 396 when the Romans captured the city. The sources say that the adult men of Veii were killed and the rest sold into slavery. The city was fully occupied by Romans, and the highly productive farmland went to Roman citizens with special set-asides for poor plebeians. In one swoop, Rome increased its territory by 75% and at the same time made common Roman citizens into beneficiaries of Roman expansion. And after a pause to ingest and organize its new territory, Roman expansion began to accelerate starting in the 380s. The Roman vision of the future was most clearly revealed by the seizure of Tusculum, which is a Latin city, in 381. A faction had come to power in Tusculum that wanted to resist the Romans, and they joined the Volsci, who were rebelling against Roman encroachment. When Rome sent an army to Tusculum, the city surrendered without a fight and executed the ringleaders of the rebellion. Rome now did something novel that was a key part of the success of Roman conquest. After Tusculum was purged of its anti-Roman leaders, the city was incorporated into the Roman state with a new status. Tusculum became the first Roman municipium. I'm going to pronounce these Latin words, by the way, in the way that they look in English, because it's just too confusing otherwise, and I don't want to masquerade that I know Latin, because I don't. So this was the first Roman municipium, and the books I've been reading say that you should not think of this from the English word municipal. That's kind of looking at it the wrong direction, that the word municipium comes from the Latin word munera, which means duty or obligations, and meant in this case military duty. And that was kind of the point of the municipium. The citizens became full Roman citizens with full rights to participate in the political arena. Essentially, this was a form of dual citizenship. So the residents were simultaneously citizens of Tusculum and citizens of Rome. The key, though, was the obligation to send troops when Rome called. Over the next 50 years, Rome enjoyed unparalleled military success, winning battles and establishing new colonies. In just 7 years, from 361 to 354, Roman generals celebrated 8 triumphs and 1 ovation. New Roman colonies staked claim to territory to the north and to the south. Rome's success attracted the attention of a more formidable foe, the Samnites.
I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
And the question is, who was the brilliance behind this?
Who is the brilliance behind doing this? That's a really great question, because it's not just one person.
I realize.
I mean, it's what we're talking about here, and I talked a lot about this in some of my previous discussions about the Roman internal developments, but Rome was basically evolving into a place that had a tradition of really strong leadership and competition for people to become leaders. The Roman system allowed people to, a magistrate only had 1 year in which they were in office. And so we're saying that the Romans established a system which consistently produced good leadership,
Right.
and with a focus on military leadership. And the Romans found a way, even though there was, what you would call a class struggle between the patricians, the old aristocracy, and the common people. At some point, the Romans found a way to take the gifted members of the plebeians and enable them to basically also become leaders of the Roman state. And this was something called the struggle of the orders. And it took place over 200 years, but it was where a lot of other places totally ripped themselves apart around this type of conflict. The Romans had kind of like an extended negotiation in which, as I say, they were able to take the more ambitious and gifted members of the plebeians and give them the opportunity to serve and to exert power and to be important people. And by the period that we're talking about here, the distinction between the patricians and the leading plebeians had, for all intents and purposes, dissolved. And the Romans had developed a new class called the nobilitae. The nobilitae were both patricians and plebeians, people who had achieved the consulship. And at that point, you had a certain, cohesion in the Roman state that was really remarkable, even though they continued to squabble with each other, and sometimes more than squabble with each other. The state held together and was I mean, there was upward mobility of a certain type, not what we would think of today, but a great upward mobility compared to other places that were their contemporaries.
Thank you for that excellent explanation. Sort of power to the people.
Yeah. Though the point is that the people became co-opted.
Mm-hmm.
So that when these plebeian people became consuls and became nobles, they kind of left their roots behind, right. And they were no longer a revolutionary force. So where the force that had driven them in they had the office of the tribune of the plebes, which everybody talks about a lot and is always seen as these revolutionary agitators, and at one point they were. But at the point that we are here, where we have this unified noble class, the tribunes of the plebes had become part of the system. And they were actually used to control the plebes rather than to advance revolutionary demands. So at the time that these leading plebeians became nobles, they basically threw the plebes under the bus, and would continue to throw crumbs to them over time. But they had achieved what they wanted, and they were not committed lifetime revolutionaries. They were not Bolsheviks.
So the plebes never reaped any of the rewards of.
They did reap rewards, and I'm going to go through that. And it was really critical that they did, because it meant that they now the common Romans had a stake,
bought into.
I mean, when Rome was expanding, they got tremendous benefits. So they bought into the system, even though they always wanted more, and the patricians always wanted to give them less. But that was the arena of political activity.
Thank you, Paul.
Sure. So with this, really kind of remarkable series of successes in the 350s, Rome came to the attention of a more formidable foe that they haven't met before, and these were the Samnites. This is a tomb painting of the Samnites from the city of Nora and of Nola, pardon me. And I just want to point out how you can see the Greek influence here. It is at this point that the Romans began to interact with the Samnites. The Samnites were a confederation of tribes living in the highlands and the valleys of central Italy. They spoke a dialect of Oscan, which was an Indo-European language related to Latin. The Samnites were a warrior culture and were very well organized, as we will see. So, pulling out to a wider map, the red dotted line shows the Roman core, the Roman territory in the first half of the 5th century. Roman expansion from 400 to 350 is shown by the pink area. But remember that this is not uniformly Roman, that there are scattered, that really what there are at the edges, there are these Roman colonies all the way around, and they're interspersed with settlements of people that are hostile to Rome or just begrudgingly accepting Roman domination and revolting on a regular basis, rebelling on a regular basis. Okay. So here is Samnium. As you can see, it's central Italy, southeast of Rome. So that means that these were mountain people. This is the Apennine Mountains. They lived in the river, in the valleys in the mountains. They spoke the Oscan language, and compared to the Romans and the Latins who lived on the plain, they had a lower population density and very few towns. And because of the limitations imposed by the terrain, their economy was primarily pastoral rather than agricultural. This, however, does not mean that they were primitive or poorly organized. There were 4 component tribes that constituted the Samnite Confederation. You see them underlined in red: the Caracini, the Pentri, the Caudini, and the Hirpini. In time of war, the tribe selected a common leader and fought as a unified army. In other words, they demonstrated a cohesiveness that set them apart from all of Rome's earlier foes. Even a people as advanced as the Etruscans were never able to unite against Rome to stop Roman expansion. But the Samnites could and did. As such, they were the only Italic people that could exert power comparable to Rome. If there was any chance of anybody to stop Roman advance, it was the Samnites. To understand the next series of events, we need to know something about the history of the Campania. The Campania is this area over here. It's an extremely fertile area, rich in trade and agriculture. And it had been, its history was that it had begun to be colonized by the Greeks starting in the middle of the 8th century, 740 or something like that. And the Greeks established cities at Cumae, which is over here, and at Neapolis, which is now Naples. Then, however, over the course of the 7th and the 6th centuries, large numbers of Etruscans moved into the area. And by the 6th century, Campania had become largely an Etruscan place. So that's the blue. And the Etruscan language was now the dominant language outside of the Greek cities. The most important city was Capua, and Capua controlled a set of subsidiary cities around it and was essentially the core of the Campania. In the 5th century, there was a phenomenon which occurred all throughout Italy, not just here. And it was the large-scale expansionist pressure from all of the Oscan-speaking tribes in the highlands. This was a very large phenomenon throughout Italy, and it happened in all directions. Tribes on the move included not only the Samnites, but also the Volsci over here, the Aequi over here, and others, the Sabini, pushing into Latium, and in the south, the Lucanians pushing south into the Greek sphere of influence. The impact on Rome was considerable, and it was questionable for quite a while whether Rome would survive. South of Latium, in Campania, the Samnite tribes pushed west out of the Apennines and began to contest for power with the Etruscan people in the Campania. In Latium, the Volsci and the Aequi made inroads, but Rome and its allies were able to withstand being overwhelmed. So we see the Romans and their allies going out and meeting these attacks and putting up an effective defense. The Samnite advance, things were different in the Campania, and the attempt to resist them was not successful. The Campania advance should not be thought of, though, as a purely military conquest, but rather a more gradual interpenetration with migration as well as military action. After some resistance, the city of Capua admitted Samnites into the city, and the Samnites repaid this kindness by seizing the city in a bloody coup d'etat in 423. The Samnites would now replace the Etruscans as the dominant power in the Campania. So that's the quick 300 years of history of the Campania. Over the next 100 years, a new hybrid culture developed in the Campania. The Oscan language was their native tongue, but they were heavily influenced by the Etruscans and by the Greeks. These people are known by the name of the Campani. The Campani were Oscan speakers, but they were highly Hellenized and no longer identified with the Samnite tribal culture back in the hills. When the later Samnites got involved in affairs in Campania, the Campani saw them as completely foreign people and vigorously resisted them. So that sets the scene for the momentous events of the next half century. The first Samnite War and the Second Latin War were quite intertwined and resulted in a settlement that put Rome on a new course in world history. The Second Samnite War saw one of Rome's most humiliating defeats, and the Third Samnite War sealed the fate of Italy. So for the rest of today, we're going to talk about the events of the First Samnite War and the Second Latin War. It's not a long time frame, but it's very, very eventful. And then I'm going to pick up next Saturday, a week from today, with Phase 2B, the Second Samnite War and the Third Samnite War. Okay, let me just pause here before we move ahead into the next. So if there's any comments or questions people want to make, this is a good time.
Question, Paul. Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah, please.
So how big were the cities at the time? Like we see the city of Veii, we see, Tuscany and all that stuff. How big were the cities, or were they just, you would say, Greek word policies more than cities?
Well, the Latin places and Rome were city-states. They were polis.
Okay.
Rome was bigger than the others by quite a lot. But, and I've seen numbers, but the numbers are not gigantic. So we're talking the low 5 figures for one of the larger cities, 4 figures for the smaller cities.
Yeah. Another question I have, the city of Veii and some of the Etruscan territories and, Tuscany and all that stuff. How the Etruscans were not aided by Greeks, because there was a trade going on prior to Rome between Etruscan and Greeks. And we know a lot of the Greek writers write about particularly Etruscans' trade and how
understand that the Etruscans were resisting Greek expansion. I mean, if it wasn't for the Etruscans, the Greeks would have penetrated much more deeply into Italy. So the Etruscans kind of kept the Greeks from taking over Italy. So they had to, even though they were greatly influenced by the Greeks, tremendously influenced by the Greeks at the same time, and friendly to Greek culture and were consumers of Greek products. In fact, many of the finest, if you go to the museum and you look for the finest examples of Greek black figure sculpture, much of it was found in Etruria. It was a big export market. However, they weren't friends. It wasn't kumbaya. The Greeks were expansionist and aggressive, and the Etruscans were equally aggressive in defending themselves, and they expanded into the Campania. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I always thought that since the trade was going on, maybe there was some collaboration, but it makes sense now.
Right. The interesting thing is that the collaboration that existed. You remember in 390 was the Gallic sack of Rome. The alliance that existed with the Greeks was with the Gauls. The Gauls were basically being hired by the Greeks as mercenaries to join their armies in Sicily, fighting against the Carthaginians and fighting against the other Greek cities. And in this period, the Greeks from Sicily were doing naval raids against the coast of Italy in coordination with the Gauls, who would come back a few times and assist them. So that was the Greek alliance, not with the Etruscans.
Okay.
Okay, so moving ahead. Here's the approximate situation in the 350s. Rome has expanded dramatically to the north and the south. She has placed colonies at strategic places around the perimeter of her sphere of influence and has annexed tracts of land from vanquished opponents. So here the Herniki, these were sometimes Roman allies, sometimes they rebelled. They had to give up tracts of land in the Talanus River Valley, and then over here in the Pontine Plain. I've since then discovered that it's really more accurate to call this the Pontine Marsh. And it was an unpleasant place filled with malaria and so forth. But the Romans were able to seize some land there from the Volsci. But as I said, the defeated adversaries were not totally crushed. These included Rome's off-again allies, the Latins, the L, the H for the Herniki, the V are the Volsci, the S are the Sidicini, the A are the Arunci, and then the C are the Campani that I just talked about. These people found themselves caught between Roman expansion and Samnite expansion. They were between the rock and the hard place. In 354 BC, the Romans and the Samnites made a treaty. Amicitia is the Roman word. It means friendship. Amigo is the cognate in Spanish for amicitia, but it also had a formal meaning as a treaty. This is a term of art. It was a particular type of treaty. Livy says that the Samnites requested the treaty because they were impressed by Rome's successes. Modern historians say that that's true, but the Romans were also impressed by the Samnites. So there was mutual respect and caution. Livy is also very vague about the terms of this treaty, but historians all agree that the Liris River, which is the blue line, demarcated the boundary between the spheres of influence of the Romans and the Samnites. So, as I said, this is the Roman sphere of influence, but that doesn't mean that it's entirely Roman, right? There are pockets of all sorts of other ethnicities in this area. The situation was unstable because it meant that the rich Campania was in the Samnite sphere of influence. And at the same time, Rome was already projecting colonies towards the south along the coast. So it was clear that Rome had interest in the Campania. Then the domino start. Oh, let me just go back one more time to the treaty and say that the treaty wasn't a mutual defense treaty. It was a mutual non-aggression treaty, which is somewhat different. And as I say, it recognized these different spheres of influence. So what happened is that the Romans started advancing to the south into the area of the Arunci tribe, which was the last tribe before you got to the Campania, and which was in their sphere of influence. And so the Samnites did the same thing, advancing on the Citizeni, which were in their sphere of influence. And these were kind of the fencing game was starting in earnest. One might say that the dominoes were beginning to fall. When the Samnites attacked the Citizeni, the Citizeni knew they had no possibility of resisting the Samnites. So they appealed for help to their Oscan-speaking cousins, who were the Campani in the Campania, and the Campani agreed. Immediately, the Samnites redirected all of their efforts against Capua. Capua had to choose which master they would prefer, the Samnites or the Romans. So they chose the Romans. But the Romans did not want to violate the treaty with the Samnites, and they said no to the Campani. They said they would not aid the Campani. This forced the Campani into a desperate ploy. They decided to just flat out surrender Capua and its allied cities to the Romans, just saying, okay, we're saying that you've conquered this place, even though you never set foot here. It's yours. And Livy has them saying to the Senate, well, if you won't defend us, at least you will defend your own territory. The Romans could not refuse this offer, regardless of their treaty with the Samnites. It was just too rich. So the Romans told the Samnites that Campania was now Roman territory and that the Samnites should back off. The Samnites would not back off. And so began the First Samnite War. As the Samnites advanced towards the sea, the city of Cumae sent an urgent cry for help to Rome. The Senate decided to attack the Samnites on two fronts and sent both consuls into action. Aulus Cornelius Cossus went directly into Samnium by the shortest path, attacking Samnium essentially from the north. And the second consul was M. Valerius Corvus, and he was sent with his legions down to the relief of Cumae. So just to, the Romans are always confusing because they use the same names again and again across multiple generations. So M. Valerius Corvus, in my previous presentation, I talked about an M. Valerius Corvus, who was his grandfather, who fought a duel against the Gauls single-handedly. And during this single man-on-man duel, and in this duel, according to Livy, a crow came and landed on his head and assisted him in fighting against the Gaul, going into the air and pecking at the Gaul's eyes and confusing him. And therefore, Valerius took the name Corvus, which means crow in Latin, as his cognomen. Cossus, by the way, means, I think, earthworm. So the Romans really were quite, they enjoyed their jokes. So as Valerius Cossus advanced to Cumae, they met the Samnites in the shadow of Mount Gaurus, right here, and they prevailed over the Samnites mostly through alert leadership and disciplined troops. The other consul who went into Samnium, which was Cornelius Cossus, this was Valerius Corvus, Cossus advanced into Samnium, and he led his army right into a trap. In Livy's lively account, we first meet Publius Decius Mus. Mus means mouse. And he, at this time, according to Livy, was a military tribune. Now, in fact, military tribunes were not created until sometime after this. But clearly, Decius Mus was a subsidiary officer in the legions under the consul. So, the army is trapped in an enclosed space, and Decius Mus spots a tactical choke point, a hill that the Samnites had to pass in order to reach the disorganized Romans. With the permission of the consul, Decius leads a contingent of men and seizes the high ground. The Samnites focus all their effort on Decius, but he and his men are able to hold them off. In the meantime, the army is able to escape. That night, Decius and his men broke out of the ring of Samnites surrounding the hill and made their way back to the Roman camp. The soldiers erupted in joyous celebration, and Decius and his detachment marched through the camp in something that Livy calls a triumph of the camp. Now, I don't think there's no other reference to this in the entire ancient sources, so we don't know whether there really was such a thing as a triumph of the camp, but it sounds like he marched through the camp with his detachment just the way a victorious general would march through Rome with his legions when they celebrated a triumph. But Decius interrupted the celebration to advise the consul that this was the time to launch an immediate counterattack against the Samnites. The consul did this, and it led to a complete rout of the enemy. For his heroism, Decius was awarded Rome's highest honor, the corona graminea, the grass crown. The grass crown was the highest and rarest of all Roman decorations, given to an officer who saved a besieged army from total annihilation. Decius received 2 of these crowns, one from the army as a whole, and the second from his own contingent of men who were with him on the hill and who he brought safely back to the Roman camp. The grass crown was basically woven from, supposed to be woven from grass that was taken from the site of the actual event where the saving of the army took place. And this is a painting by Rubens. As we'll see, Rubens was very fascinated by Decius Mus and painted a series of paintings featuring him. Back in the Campania, the Samnites gathered all the remaining forces at the town of Suessula for a last-ditch attempt to stop the Romans. This resulted in a decisive defeat for the Samnites, and then also marked the end of the fighting in 343. In 342, the Romans were distracted by internal problems. There was an army mutiny, and they were not able to pursue the war. They reestablished order, and in 341, they sent the consul Lucius Aemilius Mamercus into Samnium, but he did not meet any resistance. Apparently, the Samnites had had enough. They entreated Rome to grant them the restoration of the treaty of 354, asking only that the Romans allow them to make war on people in tribes in their sphere of influence, specifically the Citizeni, who had never been under Roman protection. The Romans granted this request and reinstated the treaty, and this ended the First Samnite War, leaving Rome as the master of the Campania. However, the fact that Rome agreed to reinstate the treaty, as well as subsequent events, indicate that the Samnites were still a formidable opponent. So, the renewed treaty of 341 between Rome and the Samnites spread alarm amongst the people directly exposed to the Samnites, which includes the Latin cities, as well as the Oscan tribesmen like the Citizenship over here, the Campani over here, and the Latins themselves. So while Rome was focused on consolidating their hold on the Campania, the Samnites attacked the Citizenship, as was permitted by the treaty. The Latins and the Citizenship formed what was nominally an anti-Samnite alliance. They were joined by the Campani, who saw the Romans leaving them helpless against the Samnites, and the Volsci, who were already in revolt against Rome. This anti-Samnite alliance led the Samnites to demand that Rome take action under the treaty to prevent its subjects from attacking the Samnites, which would violate the treaty. Rome responded in an equivocal way, but what's clear is that they did not stand up for their allies. And the allies began to plan for war against Rome. Basically, from the point of view of the Latins, Rome was now encircling them. They were there encircling them from the north and now from the south. The Volsci were in the exact same position, and they basically came to the conclusion that if they didn't revolt now, they would never get an opportunity. So when Rome essentially supported the Samnites and would not stand up for its allies, the alliance began to plan for war against Rome. The Romans caught wind of this and summoned the Latin leaders to Rome. When the Latin leaders refused to come, Rome prepared for war against the Latins. So the Romans chose new consuls to prosecute the war. The first was Titus Manlius Torquatus. He was the grandson of a consul of the same name who killed the Gaul in single combat and took the cognomen Torquatus for the torque that he took as a trophy from the dead Gaul. The other consul was Publius Decius Mus, the same man who had won the grass crown in the fighting against the Samnites 2 years later. The army marched south to Capua, and on the night of their arrival, both consuls had a dream, according to Livy, the exact same dream. And that dream was that the gods would require one of them to sacrifice his life to win the victory. Here's another painting in the series by Rubens, and this shows Decius Mus relating his dream to the army. In the battle and events that follows, Livy tells us that Manlius Torquatus sent his son on a scouting mission with strict orders not to engage the enemy. But the consul's son was recognized by a prominent Latin leader and challenged to single combat. Ashamed to refuse the challenge, the consul's son engaged and killed the Latin. But on his return to the camp, his father judged that the discipline of the army was at stake, and he ordered that his son be beaten to death by the troops with clubs. This is known as Manlius discipline. Certainly, this story it's not clear that this is historical, but there is this concept of Manlius's discipline as a kind of an object lesson for what really distinguished the Roman army throughout its history, which was its really strong discipline. Now the battle got underway, and it's called the Battle of Vesuvius. So it was happening in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. And at the critical moment, Decius Mus fulfilled his prophetic dream. He performed a Roman ritual known as the devotio, in which he calls all the threats and menaces and punishments of the gods upon himself as an individual, and devotes the enemy to the gods of the underworld. Essentially, he's offering himself as a sacrificial victim for the rest of the army. And he charged alone into the Samnite army and was very quickly slain. The Romans went on to win a great victory. And let me say that Publius Decius Mus's descendants, some of them also with the name of Publius Decius Mus, also are recorded by Livy as performing this act of devotion. So there's a family tradition, if you will. The Romans went on to win a great victory, and the result of the victory was that it detached the Campani, the Sidicini, and the Aurunci from the anti-Roman alliance, which left only the Latins and the Volsci to continue the war against Rome on their own. The final acts of the war occurred in 338 BC. A powerful army sent by the Latin cities of Tibur and Praeneste was defeated by the consul Camillus near the town of Pidium in northern Latium. The Volscians from the city of Antium were defeated by the consul Manius at the river Astura. Livy sums up the conclusion of the war, writing, quote, "The consuls resolved to proceed with their victorious army to the thorough conquest of the Latins, nor did they rest until, by storming every city or receiving its surrender, they had brought all of Latium under their domination. Then, distributing garrisons among the recovered towns, they departed for Rome to enjoy the triumph." So, the end of the Second Latin War in 338. Now, this is hugely important in Roman history, the settlement after the Second Latin War, the settlement of 338. Is a great Roman historian of the early 20th century, late 19th century, named Gaetano de Sanctis, and he called this the turning point in Roman history, and in some ways, turning point of world history, if you will. It put Rome on a different trajectory. In this time, the Romans established the pattern that they used for the future development of Roman expansion in Italy, and to some extent later in all of the Mediterranean. Tim Cornell, historian, writes that, quote, "It created a unique structure which made possible the rise of the Roman Empire." So, in this, the first thing the Romans did was they dissolved the Latin League, and they forced all their defeated enemies to deal with Rome individually, not collectively. Rome became the center of everything. And they established a set of formal juridical categories for the relationship of every community that was in their sphere of influence to the Roman state. So the first category were the municipia, with full Roman citizenship, so in Latium, many of the defeated Latin communities were incorporated into the Roman state, and their inhabitants made Roman citizens. A number of Latin cities were declared to be self-governing municipia on the model of Tusculum. Tusculum itself had taken part in the revolt, but its citizenship was restored in 338 after the ringleaders were executed. Harsh treatment was reserved for Latin allies who had rebelled, including Velitrae and Antium, which was Volscian. Velitrae's walls were razed, its ruling class was banished, and their land was distributed to Roman settlers. The remaining population was given Roman citizenship. The inhabitants of Antium, down here, also became Roman citizens, but they were forced to surrender their fleet. The Romans kept some of the ships from Antium and destroyed the rest. The consul Manliness removed the rams mounted on the bows of the ships and then set them up to decorate the speaker's platform erected near the Roman Forum. In Latin, the rams are called rostra, singular rostrum, which means literally beak. And this is a artist depiction of the rostra, and you can see the beaks protruding. The Roman rostra was located where orators could address the crowds that assembled outside the Senate house. The Senate convened behind closed doors, and people would gather to find out what had happened from senators leaving the meeting. When orators, frequently tribunes of the plebes, addressed the crowd from the rostra, the people were reminded of the state's victories against its adversaries. So as I said, the first category were the municipia, the cities with full Roman citizenship. The second category were the Latin and Herniki cities. As I said, the Latin League was dissolved. Those cities that were not awarded municipium status continued to exist as sovereign communities and continued to possess the so-called Latin rights, which were intermarriage, to have legal marriages, and commercial relations, valid contracts, and the right of migration. But the change was that they could not exercise these rights in respect to each other, only with Rome. So the citizens of Praeneste could not have legal commercial relations, according to this, with the citizens of Signa. They could only do it through Rome. So Rome, once again, became the center for every aspect of the commercial, economic, and political existence of these people. And it totally eliminated their ability to have an independent foreign policy. The third category that the Romans developed was the real great innovation. All of the people that we've talked about so far spoke Latin. I don't know what the Herniki spoke because we know almost nothing about them, but they were longtime Roman allies. But the others that the Romans had conquered were Oscan speakers in the Campania and in the Volscian territories. So the Romans devised something entirely new, which they called civitas sine suffragio, citizenship without suffrage, or half citizenship. The citizens without suffrage were liable to all the burdens and obligations of full citizens, especially military service, but they possessed no political rights. They could not vote in Roman assemblies, nor could they hold political office at Rome. They possessed the same rights as Latin cities: intermarriage, commercial relations, migration. But their legal status was different because the Latin cities were technically foreigners, and these people were technically Roman citizens of this type of diminished type. Key thing to understand here is what the Romans didn't do. The Romans did indeed confiscate some land and distribute it to Roman citizens, but most of the land was left in the possession of the native inhabitants. In other words, the conquered people were not enslaved, and they were not made into serfs, as was the custom of nearly every other state in the ancient Mediterranean. For those of you that are familiar with Greek history, the common fate of a Greek city that fell to other Greeks, was that all the adult males were killed and all the people were sold into slavery. So even though the partial citizens in these places were not particularly happy about their status, they could look around and count their blessings. They weren't dead. They weren't slaves. They weren't serfs. And as Rome prospered, they prospered too. And in 1 or 2 generations, they became full Roman citizens. So the Civitas Sine Suffragio became kind of like a intermediate place, kind of training wheels for becoming full Roman citizens. So the net of this is that this is what enabled Rome to achieve the growth that it achieved. There have been studies of city-states in the ancient world, and the conclusion of scholars is that city-states really couldn't get too much bigger than about 1,200, 1,250 families before they started to lose their characteristics as a city-state. And this was particular because of how jealous they were about awarding their citizenship. So we see the Spartans, when they expanded after the Peloponnesian War, did not create a greater Sparta. And the Athenians, when they created the Delian League at the end of the Persian War, did not create a greater Athens. They created an empire with vassal cities that paid them tribute. And Rome found a way to avoid that fate. So the first part are that the municipia allowed growth without upgrading, without changing Rome's bare bones central administration. Basically, they said that Roman citizens could exist anywhere. But they did not change the characteristic of Rome as a city-state. The half-citizenship increased available manpower, and Roman armies from this period going forward were 50% non-Roman. So that's huge. They doubled their military capability, but in doing this, they still maintained Rome's character, Rome's political institutions, Rome's traditions, and so they survived the fate that basically doomed Sparta and Athens and Thebes and all of the Greek city-states. And in creating these new colonies, they no longer had any connection to Latin ethnicity. So they were called Latin colonies, but that had nothing to do with them being Latin people or Latin speakers. It meant that they enjoyed the Latin rights. And what it meant to Rome is that they could create colonies from scratch, de novo, and put them anywhere in Italy. And this could be enacted by a simple vote in the tribal assembly, conferring Latin rights on the new community. So the new program of colonization gave Romans the chance to acquire conquered land, even in distant regions. And it allowed ordinary Romans to benefit as private individuals from Rome's territorial expansion. So Rome got buy-in from all of its citizens. It wasn't just patriotism. It was self-interest of the most basic and important kind. Everybody was getting richer while Rome was expanding and doing well. The first, go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Just on the terminology, the term Latin. Latin is an adjective form of latium. Is that correct? Or is that different?
No, I think it's the other way around. I think Latium is the name of the place where the Latins live.
Okay, but at other times when you talk about Latin rights, you're talking about Roman rights, are you not? I'm just,
no, I'm not.
I'm a little confused by the distinction between Latin and Roman.
No, I'm not talking about Roman rights. I'm talking about Latin rights. So what I'm saying is that there were two aspects to Rome's relationship with the Latins. Rome was Latin,
right?
And they shared common language. They shared common gods. They shared common practices, common cultural norms, and really, very importantly, in the ancient world, they shared common cults and common rites, and they set up places of cult worship throughout Latium that were available to all Latins, including the Romans. And among these people, traditionally, they enjoyed these so-called Latin rights, which was that they could intermarry with each other, and their marriages were seen as valid marriages, and their children were legitimate children who could legally inherit. They had what was called commercium, which was commercial relations. They could make valid contracts with each other. They could trade with each other. And they had this right called ius migrationis, which meant that a Latin could move to another Latin place, including Rome, and by establishing permanent residence there, they became a citizen of that place. So you could move from the Latin town of Tusculum to Rome, say, I'm now living here, and from then on, you were a full Roman citizen. The Latins then also had a anti-Roman political coalition at the point that they started to see Rome as being a danger to them and basically encroaching on them and becoming way too big. So you had this common Latin heritage, which was cultural, and then a separate existence, which was political, based on the realization that Rome was aggressive and expansionary, and the Latins were in danger of being absorbed and overwhelmed. And so later, these were called the Latin rights, and then the term became separated from actual Latin ethnicity. And a Latin colony then, by definition, became a place that enjoyed the Latin rights, and they enjoyed the Latin rights because the Roman assembly gave it to them.
Okay, so rights here is R-I-G-H-T-S,
yes,
not
yes.
R-I-T-E-S.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. That's right. And they did have R-I-T-E-S together.
Yeah.
They were very famous. Temple of Diana was a Latin temple. The famous 13 altars in Lanuvium and in Alba Longa, which the Romans later celebrated as being where Romulus came to reign. This were where they had common rights, R-I-T-E-S. But the political R-I-G-H-T-S was what defined the Latin colony.
Okay, thanks a lot.
So the first colony that was established under the new conditions was at a place called Callis, which is in modern Italy, it's called Calvi. And Callis is a crucial strategic spot because it's on the main route between Rome and Capua, right, which would go along the coast and then would turn inland. And Callis basically defended the Roman road. And this was before the existence of, this was the old Roman road, the Via Latium, or Latinarum, which was a dirt road, not one of these beautiful Roman sculpted, immaculately engineered roads. And Callis was the key to keeping that road open between Rome and Capua, which was the capital city of the Campania. And in this colony, the colonists included 2,500 families drawn from the Roman lower classes. Upon their arrival at the colony, they received plots of land that had been divided into allotments by Roman surveyors in a process that was called centuriation. And this is an example of, this is a 19th century Italian map showing centuriation. And it's visible today from the air in many places in Western Europe, in Italy, in France, and in the United Kingdom. The governance of the colony was placed in the hands of a small, well-to-do group of equites, which means the Roman knights, who were essentially the larger social milieu of the Senate. They were not nobles, but they were the people of means, the highest property class, who formed the ruling class. and they were given much larger plots of land than the common people. But the common people still profited. The colonies were military strongholds, as can be seen here by the walls at the Roman colony of Norba. These are described as the Cyclopean walls because the stones are so huge that the figure of speech was only giant monsters could have moved them. And the Romans established infrastructure for the colonists. This is the theater that the Romans built at Collis. Collis became a model for later colonies established at strategic points throughout the Italian peninsula during the next generations. In addition to their function as military strongholds, the colonies were Romanized enclaves of people who spoke Latin and who practiced the Roman way of life. Tim Cornell writes, quote, "As such, they contributed more than any other single factor to the consolidation of the conquest and the eventual unification of Italy under Roman rule." So that's where I hit my logical pause after the end of the Second Samnite War and this change in Rome's trajectory, this development of institutions that allowed it to transcend the limitations of the city-state and really are the key to why the Roman Empire lasted for 1,000 years and the Spartan hegemony lasted for 20 years. The Athenian hegemony lasted for 40 or 50 years. That's the difference. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and open the floor for discussion.
Paul, this is excellent.
Go ahead. I saw an interesting.
Excellent presentation. Sorry.
That was a great presentation. I had after one of Barack Obama's elections, I was on a gunner mailing list, and I got an email about America being a republic, not a democracy. And this is traced to a letter by James Madison, who explained that a democracy was ancient Athens, where all the citizens of the city gathered to discuss stuff, and a republic was like ancient Rome, where they elected somebody, and those elected people gathered to discuss it. And obviously, Madison was discussing the logistics of 3 million people scattered along 2,000 miles of coastline.
Yeah, I mean, I think the distinction, I mean, the democracy, is specifically about the idea. I mean, the demos were. I mean, if you read the ancient authors, it's pretty clear they saw demos as a synonym for the rabble, and democracy was a bad word. It had a bad connotation. Democracy connoted mob rule. It connoted irrational decisions, influenced by demagogues who themselves were corrupt. And there is example after example of that in Thucydides talking about the Peloponnesian War. Greg made a presentation this past Wednesday on the Athenian statesman Cumon, who made these phenomenal contributions to establishing the Athenian Empire and was constantly being attacked and litigated against by his democratic rivals until he was finally ostracized from the city. So democracy was not a nice word in the ancient world.
Especially it comes because of the Plato, really, and Socrates supposedly from his really despised the democracy. And I mean, democracy killed Socrates in a way. So I'm not sure. I agree that it was a really bad word at the time, but certainly it comes to us, especially with the influence from Plato, especially as not a very good form of government. He was certainly against it. But again, democracy, it was a birth of democracy in ancient Athens. And if anything else that is differ slightly from it, we can no longer call it democracy. I'm not sure I agree with that, because it developed. I mean, democracy means demos, people, kratos is power. It's a power to the people. We cannot, this was a polis. There were only citizens who could vote, so they could afford to have ecclesia and gathering of all the people and try to decide something. But in a large population that we have right now, it's inconceivable to have anything like that. So I don't know if you could like dismiss the whole idea of democracy nowadays. It's definitely, I don't know what the perfect democracy is. Hard to say.
There's two things there. I brought up the America as a republic, not a democracy, as a popular right-wing meme. And when you read it and carefully look at what they're saying, the explanations for that meme vary wildly. So I'm giving you one explanation. The other ones are absolutely crazy. The other thing is, as far as I know, there is one, I'm only aware of one pre-Enlightenment writer who advocates republics and democracy, and that is Niccolo Machiavelli.
Yeah, Machiavelli's a big Republican.
Yeah, he does it in the Prince. Unfortunately, he does it in the classic bullshit, college bullshit technique of repeating the question 3 times.
Yeah, in fact, Machiavelli has another book, which are commentaries on Livy.
His discourse, I've read his discourses.
Yeah, discourses on Livy.
Where he studies the Roman Republic and the Florentine Republic. And his basic point is that the Florentine Republic lasted about 10 years, and the Roman Republic lasted about 400 years. So the Romans were way more successful. So he compared the Romans with the Florentine.
And he advocates specific Republican institutions, like he advocates a militia-based army rather than hiring mercenaries and other. I mean, his commentary on Livy is not really anything that would, pass muster by a modern classical scholar. He kind of more used him as a place to launch with his own, political philosophies. But he did, take a lot of his cues from incidents that are described by Livy.
Well, I read it. There was a battle in Italy during the Renaissance, and the two armies smashed together and fought for several hours. And at the end of the battle, one of the knights died of a heart attack. So, like, if I'm the head of Zach's mercenary army, and you're the head of Greg's mercenary army, and we meet in battle, and you hurt me in any way, you're out of a job.
Yeah,
and the same applies to me.
What's the difference between democracy and republic? I mean, the way I understand, republic doesn't have to be a democracy. It could be oligarchy. It's like, as long as it's not just like one king or anything, as long as there is some a body of a number of people who talk to each other and they govern the country, that could be a republic. But if there is no direct election by the people, then it's a republic without democracy. But here in the United States, we do have election, and the people do make a difference. I understand it's not just the people, there is all other things. I get it, it's not perfect, but I think it is a republic and democracy versus if there is no like, for instance, there are countries where there is a pure oligarchy, and then they rule, and so I think in the United States we could still say it's a democracy. You could criticize it, you could compare it to Athens, but it's not fair comparison. It's entirely different cultures.
So let me point out that Rome, well, first, the republic basically means the public thing, right? So republic is saying that the citizens run the state. Now, whether those citizens are the common people or the rich people or some comparison, that's not part of the meaning of the word republic. It just means that it's the public trust. And
Yeah.
Rome did have democratic features in its constitution, and there are definite examples of times in Rome where legislative activity was taken in opposition to the will of the Senate, where people who the senators opposed were elected as consul, where laws that the Senate opposed were passed and became binding. So there definitely were democratic features in the Roman state. And one other point that I want to make, which is on this question of democracy as a word with a bad connotation. One of the most well-studied parts of Polybius is where he outlines his theory of political constitutions. And basically, Polybius describes a situation where there is a cycle of a type of political governance being established, and then it becomes corrupt. And when it gets corrupt, it gets replaced by something else, which is good when it starts, and then it becomes corrupt, and it gets replaced with something else. So a kingship starts as being a good thing, but then it becomes a tyranny. And then it gets replaced by an aristocracy, which is a good thing, ruled by the best people. That's what it means. And then it deteriorates and becomes corrupt and becomes an oligarchy. And then Polybius says you get a rule by the people, which is initially good, and then it becomes corrupt, and then it becomes a democracy. So Polybius specifically uses the word as being what happens when the rule of the people becomes corrupt.
I watch out the problem. Okay, I quoted that letter by James Madison. James Madison made a distinction between republic and democracy, but he carefully defined his terminology. And I think that definition is meaningful within James Madison's document, and it's not meaningful outside of it. I think we're in kind of in Humpty Dumpty mode where the word means what we choose it to mean.
So how did he define it? I'm just curious. What's the
James
difference?
Madison defined democracy as the people in the city getting together and making decisions collectively. In a republic, they held elections and they sent members to meet somewhere at some central thing.
So therefore, if it's not just a city-state, then it cannot be democracy, right?
Well, I mean, and this is the United States. This is the United States in 1780, and obviously, logistically, democracy was impossible.
Oh, okay. So I understand. So he
Right,
defines democracy that is only possible for the city-state.
But
But then, yeah, I'm not
But
sure I
you're
agree
ending
with
up
that.
with something similar to the Romans, which is you have a republic with democratic features.
Well, darn, this
Okay.
is precisely what he did. But my point is, he defined his terminology in his letter, and I think that's meaningful within his discussion, and it's not meaningful outside of his discussion.
Maybe, yeah, kind of strange.
Think of all the democratic people's republics in the world.
Yeah, definitely. When it's a big country with a large population, it's very hard to control the elections, as we find even now. And there are too many influences, money and special interests. I understand there is all kinds of corruptions happen. It's entirely different thing. Yeah, sorry, Ralph, you want to say something? No? Oh, okay. Yeah, it's what's interesting, did you mention like that exactly when you finish here in 338, that was kind of like the end of a Latin League, right? There was a Latin League, but now there is no reason for it, because now it's
broke up the Latin League.
Yeah, that's really kind of interesting. And I also wanted to see it in the perspective of what was happening in Greece at the time. That's pretty interesting that this is the time of Philip of Macedon. I mean, maybe like the domination. They until he started to dominate, and all the attention was to the east. nobody even really mentioned anything about the Italian peninsula much at this point, right? At the time of his, it's kind of
Interestingly,
interesting.
when I
Yeah.
talked about the migration of the Oscan people, Herodotus writes about the Oscans attacking Tarentum. So,
Right, but that's
so
also in Italy. Yeah.
yes,
Well,
right.
actually,
No, no,
when
no. He
Pyrrhus
was.
was, oh,
They were aware. I'm just saying that you know, there are so many things happening in Italy, and the Rome is really rising tremendously. You know, the in 338, it's Alexander didn't come to power yet. Two more years of Philip, and yet still it seems that they are very vaguely aware of what's going on there, and that at this point, I guess maybe it's Rome is quite insignificant to them, or even not worth looking into in terms of you know, richness.
well,
But
Philip
yeah,
had an
it's
historical excuse for it. Philip wanted to attack Persia, and he had an historical excuse to do it. I noticed when Pyrrhus, researching Pyrrhus, there was a lively discussion within the Roman Senate about what to do with Pyrrhus. And someone's comment was, God, we were tough when we talked about Alexander the Great. Why are we backing down with this secondary minor king?
yeah.
Well,
So they were
initially,
aware.
if you think of it, initially Philip wanted to prove that he is Greek because
Well, I
the
mean,
Macedonians.
Yeah, but-
right.
Philip conquered Greece and was obviously going to attack Persia, and he got murdered before he could do it.
Right.
He actually started it. I mean, he already started the attack on Persia. He had an army there. But the main thing, the reason why Pyrrhus started to pay attention is because the Roman expansion later on, after overcoming, I don't know if Paul is going to cover, but in general, they started to dominate, you know, Greek cities, and that's what attracted Pyrrhus eventually. That's why he was defending the Greek cities of the southern Italy.
Pyrrhus had, the Epirot kings, Pyrrhus and his predecessors both had a working relationship with Tarentum and with Syracuse. So they were active in Italy. I think one of his father or his grandfather was killed in battle in Italy. So the Epirites were active in Italy, and they were in the wrong side of Greece to go after. Like at that time, Anatolia was dominated by other Greek kings.
Well, actually,
really-
Pyrrhus,
yeah.
I mean, the big event that kind of launched Pyrrhus's career was the invasion of Greece by the Gauls. Right. This was we now in Turkey there's a region that was called Galatia.
Galatia,
Yeah.
right?
Galatia, and
Yeah.
Galatia were the Gauls that charged through Greece and ultimately crossed over into Asia Minor and formed a principality now in what is now Turkey. But Pyrrhus became famous by fighting against the Gallic invasion and was able to depict himself as the salvation of the Greeks, the savior of the Greeks. Now there were other Greek kings who also managed to have victories over the Gauls, and they also presented themselves as the saviors of the Greeks. The Greeks were really, really conscious of PR and the labels that they gave themselves. But talking about, I mean, it's interesting to see that in this time that Philip was, extending his hegemony over Greece, there was a factional battle within the Greeks, and particularly in Athens, between there was a guy named Isocrates, and his viewpoint was that he's associated with this idea of pan-Hellenism, that all the Greeks are one people. But he could not think of any way to bring this about except to urge them all to accept Philip as their leader. And the Romans found a whole different way, which was rather than trying to have a problem with people who were already Greek and politically separated, the Romans were able to take people who weren't Roman and make them Roman. And that's revolutionary.
That one's interesting.
Hmm.
Now, I've read Lords of the Sea is an interesting read. This is all about the Athenian navy. And one of their later events, I can't remember what the battle was called, the Athenian fleet lined up to fight a Macedonian fleet, and then the Athenians surrendered. And the point was the people commanding the fleet, and the point here was that Athenian democracy was as broad-based as it was because somebody had to row their war galleys. But in battle, in a sense, the people commanding the Athenian fleet were Athenian nobles who didn't want ordinary people to have any power. It's a case of win the battle, ordinary people are in power, surrender, the Macedonians are in power, and you have overall a more acceptable aristocracy in place. So they surrendered. The Macedonians went into Athens, shipped a lot of the ordinary working class Athenians out to other cities, and that was it. So from the Athenian point of view, surrendering to Macedon, from the Athenians it mattered. Surrendering to Macedon was a good idea.
Well, let me say this, is that when you talk about the Athenians or the Thebans or anybody else, you really shouldn't talk about them as if they're monolithic. There's really no such thing as the Athenian opinion. So what you have in most of these Greek cities is factions. The Greeks called this stasis. And basically, you typically would have an aristocratic or an oligarchic faction opposed by a democratic faction. And what was so damaging to the Greeks is that whenever one faction would lose, what they would do was go call for the intervention of some foreign power to conquer their city and put them back in control. So if the oligarchs lost, they would find another place that was ruled by an oligarchy and invite them to come in, and vice versa. So that's why the Greeks were always getting involved in each other's business and always inviting their enemies to come and take over their cities.
Interesting. So, Paul, I have a question regarding the presentation also. So the kind of like to get in perspective of all this, and this is really early in Roman history, but when they were setting up those colonies, as you have mentioned, was the concept of those colonies then accept them as being Romans, and therefore they will send their, basically troops as to help the Roman army, and it'll pay taxes. And some of them were not even probably Romans, like Etruscans and Samnites and stuff like that. But they still would pay the tribute to Romans and send the troops, and they have certain rights, but not really all the rights after the conquest. How was it all in the early stages met, or how did it operate?
So you got to think about colonies. The first consideration of colonies was that they were strategic military outposts.
Mm-hmm.
That was their real reason for existence, is they would stick a colony on the place where the enemy would have to pass through before they got to Rome. So they were designed to be buffer areas.
Mm-hmm.
And the colonists were, in many cases, veterans. So they were ready, and the participation of Romans in the military was astronomical, even compared to the ancient world, let alone the modern world. So Romans, very likely, if you were able-bodied, you served in the army. So they were trained, and they had this martial culture that celebrated bravery and celebrated warfare. And all these stories in Livy about how somebody comes into the forum and takes off his tunic, and he shows them all the wounds that he's received in battle on his chest, and he says, "There are no wounds on my back.
Right.
All my wounds
They're like
are on the front."
Spartans. They're like Spartans. They had similar
This
culture.
is in Livy about the Romans. Many times, and it's frequently it's a poor farmer who's destitute, and he's coming in and saying, "Look, I've given my life for Rome. What have you given for me?" So the point was that the Romans found a way to basically kill like 3 or 4 birds with the same stone. So they formed military outposts for security. They found a way to take new land and distribute it to their poorer citizens who were land hungry in Rome. and give them a buy-in. Say, okay, we just conquered this, and such and such Petzonavanti just had a triumph, and he marched to Rome in his chariot with the white horses. You get 100 acres. You know what? 100 acres is pretty damn good in the ancient world. And furthermore, where they're going to say, we're going to protect this place, and we're going to build roads, and you're going to have commerce. So it was a pretty good deal. And in exchange for that, you had to be in the front line when the Volsci would come down out of the hills. So that's the basic idea. And then over time, the Romans doubled down on this idea and started sending their colonies further and further distant from Rome.
Interesting.
I'm just checking up on my. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and it may not be a related topic, but one of the things I wanted to do, I want to actually do what we didn't do justice on the Greeks is we never talked about the outpost Greek countries or states, like, for example, Bosphorus, right? Like for Ukraine, for Russia, the Bosphorus Crimean Greek outpost was one of the most major ones. It's all in the Russian books presented. And we never spoke about the Bosphorus state in Crimea on the Black Sea. And it actually outlived Roman Empire, believe it or not. It started before the Roman Empire and outlived West Roman Empire, was therefore integrated into Byzantium. But it was this state we never mentioned in any of our discussions. I'd like to do a presentation.
Well, Mithridates, Mithridates of Pontus, but that's later on. But that's when Sulla and Pompey.
No, Bosphorus was actually established prior to.
I know, but they came to the power at the time of Mithridates. Became like really significant state.
No, but I want to talk about the state itself.
Earlier one. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Earlier
Right.
to the end,
Sure.
when it was integrated into Byzantium. So somebody would have to do 800 years of history in one shot, basically.
Yeah. Well. By the way,
big deal of the Athenian Empire. Greg talked about this discussion we had on Wednesday. You people missed something good. The Kimon. I was not aware of this until Greg's presentation. But this guy Kimon essentially was the guy that established the Athenian Empire, and he did it by opening up the passageway to the Black Sea.
Right.
Right. And then the Athenians then, well, there were already colonies in the Black Sea, originally even by the Euboeans, but they became Athenian, and that was the breadbasket of Athens.
Right.
And
the grain, right? The grain was
right. That was where the grain came from. And the end of the Peloponnesian War was when the Spartans closed the Black Sea.
And that's, by the way, we're going to discuss in about 10 days or whatever on Wednesday, on 27th, I think. That's the life of Lysander, because not that many people realize that it's Admiral Lysander who basically concluded the Second Peloponnesian War, and it really happened at the Propontis. There's a Dardanelles, the Strait Dardanelles. That's where the last battle, and the Athenian fleet was destroyed. So Lysander is the one who actually established the the Spartan rule over Athens itself. He went to Athens, and all of the cities of the Athenian Empire or Delian League, he enforced the rules there, put their pro-Spartan leaders, and as we know, the what's the tyranny of 30, right? I think that ruled for a short period of time. I think it was like maybe 8 months or 10 months. Right. He is the one who established it. He was representing Spartan authority, and he made the rules, and he actually controlled. He was the ultimate power at the end of the Peloponnesian War. So we're going to discuss Plutarchus, the life of Lysander, if anybody interested.
That reminds me that a month from there, so we have to think about the next subject for literature piece. I definitely don't want to do away with literature piece. I love, we have that, stream going separately. I want to do actually meditations by Augustus, if anybody interested.
You mean Aurelius?
Augustus? No, you mean Marcus Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius, sorry. So if anybody interested to like get major quotes and talk about the times, why I'm mostly interested in historical aspect of the philosophy
But it's more kind of like ethics. I think like he has like this 4 lines of wisdom. It probably has more to do with ethics.
Recently, believe it or not, a lot of the Stoic books that people are hitting right now is actually based on his meditations.
Of course.
And so it's interesting that Stoicism. I wanted to understand it more. I mean, I'm not very familiar with it, and people read all these quotes to go on with their day. I just kind of relate to that, and maybe we can talk about the times.
Maybe Seneca. Seneca was the earlier, most prominent Stoic.
Oh, that was way before that.
Zeno of Cyprus.
Cato, who was one of the conspirators against Julius Caesar, was a famous Stoic. The Romans liked Stoicism because it kind of appealed to their primal myth about their origins. People who were frugal and were not ostentatious and didn't have luxuries and were very realistic and were
virtuous at the same time, worrisome and virtuous. Yeah.
So the Stoics kind of played into the Romans' ideology about themselves. So they.
I don't know. I think Zeno of Cyprus. He is the one who was the founder of the Stoicism. But I don't know if he has anything.
Takes its name from the Stoa in Athens.
I know, but the founder, from if I remember correctly, it was Zeno.
I'm not contradicting you. I'm just saying that. The philosophers would come to Athens from all over the world because that was the center. And so the school of the Stoics started on the Stoa, which was like a strip mall, right? Think of the Stoa as an ancient strip mall. It's a colonnade, and you can still see them. Yeah. And there were shops.
I think he went to Athens, Zeno himself, but he is considered to be. But I wonder if I never heard that anything survived, any writings of his survived. I don't know, maybe
My personal favorite, there's a guy named Boethius who was sitting in prison in Rome or Ravenna or someplace like that when he'd be executed. He wrote a piece called Consolations of Philosophy. And apparently Alfred the Great translated this into English and added a couple of paragraphs to it.
Now, Boethius was a Christian, right?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incidentally, I went back into my King Pyrrhus notes. It was the guy that got killed in Italy was a great uncle named Alexander, who was a contemporary of Alexander the Great. And I'm looking at the Wikipedia page, and Livy is reporting how Alexander of Epirus lay mortally wounded, and he compared his fortunes to those of his famous nephew and said that the latter waged war against women. This is Livy's version of the story, of course.
Almost donkeys of some kind.
Yeah, there were relatives.
The point was that Alexander the Great was fighting against women. Alexander of Epirus was fighting against real men.
Let's just give Livy his due. I mean, all of the really interesting stories that were part of my presentation were in Livy. And Livy is a really engaging storyteller. And if you were to look back, in the 19th century, in the first half of the 20th century, Livy was popular, and there were lots of books and historical novels based on stories out of Livy. So, but now Livy's totally forgotten, and we don't know these stories. We know about some of the Greek heroes, but not about the ones that Livy writes about. But this, like in the time of the American Revolution, everybody read Livy.
Yeah. And he wrote extensively on all of these Syrian, Macedonian wars, on the how the Rome came to power later on.
Unfortunately,
I didn't know that Livy was actually a teacher of Claudius. I didn't. That was interesting. The concept. And then he didn't know that he would become an emperor, right? Because he was
Yeah,
like a weakling.
Claudius himself wrote the history of Rome in
That's
40, 40
Because of
volumes or
Livy,
something.
Yeah, because of Livy, yeah.
You know, this, he
None
was
of
like,
none of which we have.
right. It's
I take it. He also wrote a history of Etruscan. I think he wrote a history of the Etruscans, didn't he? Yeah.
I think so. Yes.
We gotta do
There's a
Claudius
fabulous
one
scene
day
in
too,
I
because-
Claudius where he sends out his book to be copied, and the copier illustrates it with pictures of elephants, and Claudius goes absolutely nuts. I didn't ask for elephants. Why'd you put elephants?
Hold on. So they only had like books on like one papyrus.
Then that becomes the key for him to overthrow the reign of what's his name, of the Praetorian Guard,
Janice?
Sejanus, right? So according to
Sejanus, yeah.
Robert Graves, Claudius takes a letter from his mother, Roman noblewoman Antonia, and he conceals it inside the copy of his history, which no one is interested in. And he goes to the island of Capri, which is where the Emperor Tiberius is living, and under the guise of presenting him with a copy of his work, he's really giving him this letter telling Tiberius of what Sejanus is doing back in Rome, and then Tiberius has Sejanus killed.
Yeah, because he took all the power, but he relinquished in a way power. I mean, Tiberius to Sejanus.
Yeah,
He trusted him so much, and he just like ruled like an emperor practically.
Tiberius left for Capri. He was there for 15 or 20 years. He never went back to Rome.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Having
Well,
orgies and
Great discussions, guys. I just wanted to reiterate what we have following up. So on Tuesday, Richard is talking about Khwarezmians and Mongols, or particularly the Mongols taking over Damascus, and then Ilkhanate, which was converted to Muslim religion. And so we continue on Middle Eastern. On Wednesday, what do we have? Oh, we don't have anything on Wednesday. Saturday we have expansion of Rome. And Paul, if you can give me a little bit of description so I can attract more people.
second
on
and
the
third Samnite Wars.
Third Samnite Wars. Okay.
Second and third Samnite Wars.
Second and third Samnite Wars. Okay, I'll put it in. And then
Calling that expansion of Rome phase 2B.
expansion. Okay, got it.
Today
On
was 2A.
Sunday, by most requested, we're doing a movie. Sergio is going to do a movie, Gladiator. So do join us. We'll be playing a clip of the movie, and then we're going to discuss whether it's a myth or if it's truth or if it's real. He'll particularly talk about arms and armor. He's going to talk about the strategic and and war situation, and we can talk about the rest. I guess we know enough to just kind of like through. If you guys can watch the movie before, it would be cool. Again,
I've seen it too.
305. Yeah, and then we'll discuss that. It'll be a free, open discussion. There won't be any presentation. We'll be playing a clip of the movie. We'll discuss it, and it'll be a free, open kind of discussion type of thing. That's that. And then the following week, as Greg had pointed, do join us for Wednesday, Lysander of Plutarch. And we have other ones that please follow the schedule. Should be good. We have some really good ones coming out. Oh, don't forget, we do have Narul talking about Muslim religion. He's going to talk about Islam 101. Then he's going to follow it up with Sharia law. And then he's going to follow it up by women in Islam. As you know, recently Taliban had promised that they're going to create a secondary school for girls. I don't know how true it is. So far, they're not allowed to go to universities and all that stuff. So we want to understand where the rest of the community stands with the women in Islam and stuff like that. So should be an interesting one. All right. Thank you, Paul. Great presentation. Great discussion, everybody.
Yep.
Great participation. And see you guys next week whenever you guys come.
Right.
Thank you.
Have a good week.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Okay,
Great.
thanks a lot,
Take
Paul.
care.
Very good.
Thanks
Thank you.
again. Great.